Judge demanded royal guard take off his Victoria Cross, only to learn his true identity hope story. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet, as the royal guard stood at attention near the judge's bench. His uniform was perfect, every crease in place, his polished boots shining under the soft light that fell from the high windows. People who had been talking softly stopped immediately when they saw him. Something about the way he stood there, silent, proud, and completely composed, demanded attention. But no one in the room, not even the judge, had any idea about the story behind the man who seemed like just another soldier performing his duty. The judge, a tall, stern man with sharp features and glasses that always seemed to perch precariously at the tip of his nose, glanced at the guard. His eyes narrowed as he noticed a small medal on the man's chest, gleaming in the light. It was the Victoria Cross. The judge had seen many medals in his life, but he had never allowed any to remain in his courtroom while addressing legal matters. Protocol, he believed, was everything, and tradition dictated that no one should wear any decoration while standing before him unless they had explicit permission. "Remove that medal," the judge said in a voice that echoed through the courtroom. It wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that made people pause mid-breath. "Take it off immediately. No one wears such things here." The guard did not move. He did not frown, nor did he show any sign of anger. He simply stood straighter, his chest out, his gaze calm yet steady. There was a pause, a moment in which time seemed to stretch. The courtroom, which had been filled with quiet murmurs moments before, fell completely silent. All eyes were on him, on the polished metal shining on his chest. People started whispering to each other. Some shook their heads slightly, confused by the situation. "Why won't he take it off?" A young woman whispered to her companion. "Isn't he supposed to follow orders?" But the guard didn't respond. He knew his place and he knew the rules, yet something inside him, a sense of honor perhaps or pride in what the medal represented, kept him from removing it. This wasn't arrogance, it was dignity. The Victoria Cross was not just any medal. It was awarded for bravery beyond imagination, for acts that ordinary people could not even picture. To this man, it wasn't something to show off. It was a symbol of the lives he had saved, the sacrifices he had made, and the courage he had summoned when everything seemed lost. The judge frowned, tapping his fingers on the wooden surface of the bench. He did not like being defied, even if it was done silently. "I said remove it," he barked again, his voice rising slightly, breaking the tense calm of the room. Some people in the audience leaned forward in their seats, curious to see what would happen next. Would the guard obey, or would he challenge the authority of the court? Still, the guard did not speak. He did not flinch. He simply looked straight ahead, eyes steady, expression calm. Every muscle in his body was relaxed yet alert, like a tree rooted deeply in the ground that could not be shaken by wind. For a moment, the judge wondered if he was dealing with a stubborn man, one who refused to follow orders for no reason. But there was something in the way the guard held himself that suggested there was far more to this man than met the eye. As the silence stretched, the whispers in the room grew louder, but they were careful, respectful whispers. People were sensing that this was not an ordinary situation. There was tension, yes, but also curiosity and even admiration. The guard's calmness had a strange effect on everyone. It was impossible not to notice. Finally, one of the courtroom officers, an older man who had served for many years, stepped forward quietly. He whispered something into the judge's ear, but the judge shook his head, impatient. "I don't care who he is. He must remove it," the judge insisted, his voice firm and unyielding. The guard shifted slightly but did not move the medal. His hands remained at his sides, and his eyes never left the front of the courtroom. He was prepared to obey, certainly, but he also knew that the story behind the medal deserved respect. He had earned it in ways that most people could not imagine. He had faced fear and danger head-on, in circumstances so perilous that ordinary men would have run away. And now, here he was, standing silently in a courtroom, his bravery unrecognized by someone who had never experienced the battlefield. People in the courtroom began to glance at each other, sensing the tension, but also feeling the weight of history that seemed to hang in the air. They did not know the details yet, but somehow they felt that the man in uniform was extraordinary. He had an aura of quiet strength that made it impossible to look away. Even children in the back rows, who often fidgeted and whispered during serious proceedings, sat still, watching him. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, adjusting his glasses. His expression softened for a brief moment as he studied the guard more carefully. There was something familiar about the way the man held himself, a sense of pride mixed with humility. But the judge's sense of duty, his respect for rules and decorum, made him insist on protocol. Still, deep down, he could not completely ignore the feeling that this man was remarkable. The silence continued, broken only by the soft scratching of pens on paper as some of the clerks took notes. Outside the windows, the wind rustled through the trees, but inside the courtroom, it felt like the world had stopped. The guard's presence dominated everything, commanding respect not through words, but through the sheer weight of his courage and character. Finally, the guard did something small but significant. He raised his hand slightly, not in defiance, but in a quiet gesture of explanation. He began to speak, his voice low but steady, carrying a calm authority that surprised everyone. "Sir," he said to the judge, "this medal is not for pride. It is for the lives of those I served with and those I helped. Removing it would not honor them." The courtroom fell even quieter. The judge stared at him, blinking, as if hearing these words had changed something. People exchanged glances, realizing that there was a story here that went far beyond rules or appearances. This was about courage, sacrifice, and respect for the past, a past that most people could only imagine in stories or history books. The guard stood silently again, waiting. He did not press his point further. He simply held himself with quiet dignity, allowing the weight of his words and the meaning of the medal to speak for itself. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom began to understand that this was not an ordinary man. This was someone whose life had been shaped by bravery and service, someone who had faced dangers that most could not even picture. The Victoria Cross was more than a decoration. It was a symbol of courage, honor, and hope. And now, in the quiet of that courtroom, it seemed almost to shine brighter, demanding respect from all who were present. The judge, for the first time, seemed unsure. He had demanded obedience, but now he felt something different, a mixture of awe, respect, and perhaps even humility. He realized that this man had earned far more than anyone in that room could ever fully understand. And in that realization, the courtroom became more than a place of rules and procedure. It became a place where bravery, honor, and humanity could be seen in its purest form. The guard continued to stand, silent yet powerful, as the tension in the room slowly transformed into something else. People began to feel a quiet sense of hope, a sense that even in a world of rules and regulations, true courage could not be ignored. The Victoria Cross was a small object, yet it carried a story far larger than anyone could have imagined. And in that moment, the guard became more than just a figure in a uniform. He became a symbol of hope, a reminder that bravery often goes unnoticed, yet it leaves a lasting mark on the world. People would remember this day, not because of the rules or the judge's authority or even the courtroom itself, but because of the quiet dignity and extraordinary courage of a man who simply stood still, refused to remove his medal, and reminded everyone that some things are worth honoring no matter the setting. The courtroom remained tense, but now the tension had changed. It was no longer just about rules or protocol. It was about curiosity, about the story behind the man who stood silently with the Victoria Cross on his chest. People could feel that something extraordinary was happening, even if they didn't yet know the details. Everyone was watching, waiting for the next move. Whispers began to spread again, this time with more urgency. Some people leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide. "Who is he?" one man whispered to his neighbor. "Why won't he take it off?" The neighbor shrugged but kept looking at the guard, who continued to stand perfectly still. Even the judge, who had been so confident just moments ago, felt a strange mixture of frustration and curiosity. He had seen many people in his courtroom, but never anyone like this. The royal guard, despite the growing attention, remained calm. He did not look around, nor did he react to the whispers. His mind was focused, not on the courtroom or the judge, but on the responsibility he carried, not just for himself, but for the people who had entrusted him with their lives. The Victoria Cross was more than a medal. It was a promise, a reminder of the courage and sacrifice that it represented. It was a symbol of every person he had served with, and every life he had helped protect. A young clerk, sitting near the front of the courtroom, could not help but glance at the medal again and again. She had read about the Victoria Cross in history books, about soldiers who had performed acts of incredible bravery, sometimes at the cost of their own lives. She had never imagined seeing one in person, and certainly never imagined seeing someone wearing it while standing silently in a courtroom, facing a judge who had no idea of the heroism behind it. The judge, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, cleared his throat and tried again. "Sir," he said, his tone firmer this time, "you must remove the medal. It is against the rules of this court. I am asking you as the authority here." Still, the guard did not move. He did not argue, nor did he display any emotion. His eyes remained steady, and his posture remained perfect. There was a quiet strength in him, the kind of strength that did not need to speak loudly to be felt. Every person in the courtroom could feel it, and it made them lean in a little closer, trying to understand the man behind the medal. Outside, the sun had begun to move lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light through the tall windows of the courtroom. The light fell on the guard, making the Victoria Cross gleam even brighter. It caught the attention of everyone present, and for a moment, it was as if the entire room was illuminated not just by sunlight, but by the weight of courage and history that the medal represented. The spectators, many of whom had initially come to the courtroom for a routine case, now found themselves caught up in something far more compelling. They watched silently, sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would not be forgotten. Some of them began to imagine the stories behind the medal, the battles fought, the dangers faced, the lives saved. Their hearts began to fill with admiration, even before they knew the full story. The guard's calmness seemed almost supernatural. He had been trained to remain composed in all situations, but this was different. This was not a drill, nor was it a formal ceremony. This was real life, and the tension was as much about respect as it was about rules. Every second he stood there, not moving, not flinching, reinforced the idea that the medal was not just an ornament. It was a testament to bravery, and it demanded acknowledgement. The judge, feeling the eyes of the entire courtroom upon him, began to realize that there was more at stake than mere protocol. He had demanded the removal of the medal out of respect for the law, but now he wondered if he had underestimated the man in front of him. He could sense that this was not about pride or defiance. This was about honor, humility, and an unspoken story that no one yet fully understood. Finally, the judge spoke again, this time with a slightly softer tone. "Explain to me," he said, "why you cannot remove it. I need to understand." His voice carried not just authority but a hint of genuine curiosity. The guard shifted slightly, just enough to show that he was about to respond, but he still spoke with the same calm, steady voice. "Sir," he said, "this medal is not for myself alone. It represents every life that was at risk, every person who trusted me, and every comrade who stood beside me in situations where fear could have taken control. To remove it would be to forget them, even for a moment. A murmur of surprise ran through the courtroom. People leaned forward in their seats, some even holding their breath. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that could be felt by everyone present. The judge blinked, momentarily speechless. He had expected defiance or argument, but not this quiet, humble explanation. The young clerk who had been watching the guard's every move now felt a lump in her throat. She realized that the man standing there was not trying to impress anyone. He was not seeking attention or praise. He was simply being true to the lives he had served, the people he had protected, and the honor he had earned. It was a lesson in courage that went far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, a soft breeze carried the sound of distant voices, but inside, time seemed to stand still. Every person in the room felt the presence of something larger than themselves, a story of bravery, sacrifice, and quiet dignity that demanded respect. It was as if the guard, without raising his voice or making a grand gesture, had captured the attention of everyone present simply by standing tall and speaking truth. The judge, who had been so sure of his authority just minutes before, now felt a sense of humility. He realized that rules and decorum, while important, could not replace the recognition of true courage. He looked at the guard more closely, noticing the calm strength in his eyes, the steadiness of his posture, and the quiet pride that was neither boastful nor arrogant. He was witnessing a man who had faced unimaginable dangers and had emerged not just alive, but honorable. At that moment, a few other officers in the courtroom began to whisper among themselves. They recognized the medal and understood its significance. Some had served alongside soldiers who had earned the Victoria Cross, and they knew the stories of bravery, risk, and selflessness it represented. Their whispers carried a tone of respect, admiration, and even awe. The courtroom seemed to transform. What had started as a simple dispute over protocol now became a moment of reflection for everyone present. The guard's story, though not yet fully told, had already left an impact. People began to see beyond the uniform, beyond the rules, and into the heart of a man who had dedicated his life to courage and service. Even the judge, who had initially demanded the removal of the medal, began to feel a sense of reverence. He realized that authority, rules, and decorum were important, but they were nothing compared to the weight of true bravery. And here, standing silently with the Victoria Cross on his chest, was a man who had earned every bit of respect that could be given. The guard, sensing the shift in the room, remained humble. He did not smile, nor did he seek acknowledgement. He simply continued to stand, embodying the principles he had lived by: courage, honor, and selflessness. His presence was a quiet reminder that some lessons could not be taught with words alone. They had to be witnessed, felt, and understood. People in the courtroom began to exchange looks, realizing that they were witnessing a story that would be remembered for years. The Victoria Cross, shining brightly on the guard's chest, was no longer just a medal. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. It reminded everyone that courage was not always loud, and that the greatest heroes often carried their deeds quietly, letting their actions speak for themselves. As the sun continued to set, casting warm light across the room, the guard remained standing. Every eye in the courtroom was on him, and every person present felt the gravity of the moment. This was not just a courtroom. It was a place where courage and honor were being recognized, even in the most unexpected circumstances. And as the murmurs of admiration and curiosity continued to ripple through the audience, the judge finally leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. He realized that the story of the man in front of him was far larger than any courtroom procedure, far more important than any rule or regulation. It was a story of life, sacrifice, and the quiet, unassuming bravery that shaped history and touched every person it encountered. The courtroom was silent, but the tension had shifted. What had begun as a disagreement over protocol now had transformed into a quiet anticipation. People leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity burning brighter than ever. The royal guard had not moved, not flinched, and his calmness had begun to speak louder than words. Every person in the room could feel the weight of history in the air, and it was growing heavier with each passing second. The judge, who had been so firm at first, now looked uncertain. His eyes were fixed on the medal, which gleamed like a small sun on the guard's chest. He had demanded its removal, insisting on rules and decorum, yet now he began to wonder if he had underestimated the man standing before him. There was a dignity in the guard's stance, a quiet strength that could not be ignored. Every fiber of the man seemed to carry a story, and the judge knew he was about to learn something remarkable. The murmurs of the audience grew softer, almost reverent. Spectators exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some whispering quietly to each other. They were beginning to sense that this was not an ordinary soldier, nor an ordinary moment. They could feel it in the air. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. People who had come to the courtroom expecting routine proceedings now felt as if they were witnessing history. Suddenly, an older officer stepped forward. He had been standing quietly to the side, observing the tension and the silent standoff between the guard and the judge. This officer had served with the Royal Guard for decades, and he knew the meaning of the Victoria Cross better than anyone else in the room. His voice was low but carried across the silent courtroom as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor," he began, "I believe you may not know who you are addressing." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. This man is not just a guard. He is a recipient of the Victoria Cross for his bravery in battle. A wave of astonishment swept through the room. Some people gasped quietly, while others leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the guard. The judge blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard by the officer's words. He adjusted his glasses, as if seeing the guard more clearly for the first time, and leaned forward slightly. "Explain," the judge said, his voice steadier but now mixed with curiosity rather than authority. "Tell me what you mean. What bravery? What did he do?" The older officer nodded and took a slow breath before speaking again. "Sir, this man risked his life in ways most people cannot imagine. He has saved countless lives in combat, faced dangers that would terrify even the bravest, and acted with courage that deserves the highest recognition. That medal," he said, pointing to the Victoria Cross, "was awarded to him for actions that went beyond the call of duty, actions that saved not only his comrades but also civilians caught in conflict." The audience was silent, captivated by the officer's words. It was as if the story had finally begun to reveal itself, piece by piece. People could not imagine the kind of courage it must have taken to earn such an honor. They glanced at the guard, who continued to stand perfectly still, humble yet commanding. The judge leaned back slightly, absorbing the information. His stern expression softened, and a look of awe appeared in his eyes. He had demanded the removal of the medal without knowing anything about the man who wore it, and now he realized the gravity of his misunderstanding. This was a person who had risked life and limb, someone who had faced situations no ordinary human could survive. And yet here he was, standing silently in a courtroom, demanding nothing, asking nothing, simply fulfilling his duty as a guard. The courtroom officers who had been quietly observing now exchanged nods. Some of them had served alongside soldiers who had earned the Victoria Cross, and they knew the stories of courage, sacrifice, and selflessness that went with it. Their faces reflected respect and admiration. Even the young clerk who had been taking notes felt her heart swell with pride. She could barely imagine the bravery behind the small medal, yet now she understood that the guard had lived it, breathed it, and embodied it. The guard himself remained silent. He did not boast, did not gesture, and did not seek attention. He simply stood, letting the story of his bravery speak for itself through the testimony of the officer. There was a quiet strength in him, an unshakable calm that drew the eyes and hearts of everyone in the room. It was impossible not to be moved by the humility behind such heroism. The judge leaned forward again, his hands clasped together on the bench. I had no idea," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I thought you were simply wearing a medal out of pride. I see now that I was wrong." His gaze softened as he looked at the guard, who remained composed and dignified. "You have my deepest respect," the judge continued, "for what you have done and for the courage you have shown." A ripple of relief and admiration passed through the courtroom. People whispered softly to each other, sharing the sense of awe they felt. Some wiped their eyes, unable to hide their emotion. Others simply sat back, letting the realization sink in that the man in front of them was not an ordinary guard, but a hero who had walked through the fires of danger and returned with courage intact. The officer continued, providing more details. He acted in the most dangerous situations imaginable. In one operation, he led his team through enemy territory to save civilians trapped in the crossfire. In another, he risked his own life to pull wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire. He never sought recognition for these deeds. He did them because it was the right thing to do, because he believed in protecting others, no matter the cost. Every word sent waves of admiration through the audience. They imagined the peril, the fear, and the courage it must have taken. The courtroom, which had once been filled with whispers and tension, now held a solemn silence, broken only by the occasional soft gasp or quiet murmur of awe. The judge looked down at the guard again. The man's eyes were calm, steady, and filled with humility. He had faced horrors that most people could not imagine, yet he stood here in a uniform, not demanding praise, not seeking fame, but simply fulfilling his duty. The judge's stern expression had melted into one of respect, his earlier insistence on protocol replaced by a sense of wonder at the bravery before him. "Sir," the judge said softly, almost to himself, "you have done what most of us could never even dream of. I am sorry for questioning you. I see now that this medal is not just decoration. It is a testament to the lives you have saved, the courage you have shown, and the character you carry." The guard inclined his head slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement but nothing more. His humility was as remarkable as his courage. He did not need to say anything. The weight of his experiences and the presence of the Victoria Cross spoke louder than any words ever could. Spectators began to murmur softly, their admiration growing with each passing moment. The courtroom had transformed from a place of authority and procedure into a space where courage, honor, and humanity were being recognized. Every person present felt privileged to witness it. Some even realized that they were learning an important lesson. True heroism often comes quietly, without fanfare, without recognition, and yet it leaves a lasting impression on everyone it touches. The officer, seeing that the judge had come to understand, stepped back. He knew that the guard's actions had already spoken for themselves, and that the audience would never forget the moment when the truth was revealed. The guard remained standing, serene and composed, the Victoria Cross catching the light and shining like a beacon of hope. For a few moments, no one spoke. Everyone seemed to be reflecting on what they had learned. The young clerk, the officers, the spectators, and even the judge were united in a silent acknowledgement of the courage that had been present all along. It was a quiet, powerful moment, a moment that would linger in their memories for years to come. Finally, the judge spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of respect and admiration. "This courtroom has been reminded today of something that cannot be taught in any book, nor fully understood by rules alone. True courage is rare, and it is even rarer to meet someone who embodies it so completely. Thank you for your service and for reminding us all of what it means to be brave." The guard, as always, remained calm. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the words, but he did not speak further. He had never sought recognition, and he did not need it now. The respect of the judge, the understanding of the audience, and the recognition of his peers were enough. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The story of the royal guard, standing silently with the Victoria Cross on his chest, would be remembered not just for the medal itself, but for the courage, humility, and humanity it represented. And as the courtroom slowly returned to its usual pace, the memory of the revelation lingered. People whispered about what they had seen, about the bravery that had been hidden behind a uniform, about the quiet strength that had transformed a simple courtroom into a place of awe and respect. The guard had reminded them all of something important, that courage, honor, and hope can shine even in the most ordinary of places, and that heroes often stand silently among us, waiting for their stories to be told. The courtroom, which had been tense and uncertain just moments before, now felt like it had been transformed. The revelation of the royal guard's true identity had shifted the atmosphere completely. People sat in their seats, still processing what they had just learned. What had started as a dispute over rules had turned into a moment of deep respect, admiration, and even wonder. The guard himself remained standing, calm and composed, the Victoria Cross gleaming in the soft light of the room. The judge, who had been stern and unyielding just a short while ago, now looked at the guard with a mixture of awe and humility. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, and spoke in a voice that was softer than before, but carried with it a new weight of understanding. "Sir, I realize now that I acted too quickly in insisting that you remove your medal. I did not understand the significance of what it represents, nor the extraordinary courage it symbolizes. I apologize for my earlier demands." The words hung in the air, carrying the sincerity of someone who had recognized their mistake. The guard inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the judge's apology, but he did not speak. He had never sought praise, nor did he need it. His calm acceptance of the apology reflected the same humility that had guided him throughout his life of service. The courtroom audience began to murmur softly. Spectators who had been on the edge of their seats now exchanged looks of admiration and respect. Some whispered about the bravery they had just heard described. Others were visibly moved, their eyes shining as they considered the dangers the guard had faced and the lives he had saved. It was impossible not to be affected by the quiet dignity of the man standing before them. The older officer who had first revealed the guard's history stepped forward once again. "Your Honor," he said, "if I may, I would like to formally acknowledge the service and heroism of this man. He has been awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, for acts of bravery that saved lives and protected countless others. It is only right that his courage be recognized here today in front of all who have witnessed it." The judge nodded solemnly. "You are correct," he said. "This courtroom should not simply enforce rules and protocol without recognizing extraordinary courage. Let it be known that your bravery, sir, commands respect and admiration from everyone present." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of recognition that the guard had long deserved. The audience responded with a quiet, respectful applause. It was not loud or showy. It was a gesture of genuine admiration and acknowledgement. The guard remained composed, allowing the moment to pass with dignity, as if the applause was not for him alone, but for every life that had been touched by his actions. As the room settled again, the judge gestured toward the officer who had spoken. "Would you, sir, share more about his actions so that everyone may understand the magnitude of his bravery?" he asked. The officer nodded. "With pleasure," he said. He began recounting specific moments of heroism, each one more astonishing than the last. He spoke of the guard leading missions in dangerous terrain, rescuing civilians trapped in conflict, and risking his own life to protect his comrades under heavy fire. Each story was delivered with care and respect, painting a vivid picture of courage that seemed almost unimaginable. The courtroom listened intently. Every eye was fixed on the guard, whose calm demeanor contrasted with the intensity of the stories being told. People were struck not only by the bravery described, but also by the humility with which he had lived his life. He had never sought recognition, yet here he stood, fully deserving of every word of praise. As the officer spoke, the young clerk in the front row could not help but feel inspired. She had always admired bravery in books and films, but seeing it reflected in a real person, someone who stood silently before them, was far more powerful. She glanced at the guard, noticing the quiet strength in his eyes, the way he held himself with grace and humility. It was a lesson in courage that would stay with her forever. The judge, too, seemed deeply moved. His earlier insistence on protocol had been replaced by genuine respect. He realized that rules and regulations, while important, could never replace the recognition of true courage. He had demanded compliance without understanding, but now he understood fully the depth of heroism standing before him. "Sir," the judge said, addressing the guard once more, "you have reminded us all of the true meaning of courage. You have shown that bravery is not about recognition or reward, but about standing firm when others cannot, and acting selflessly to protect those who are vulnerable. Your actions have left an indelible mark, not only on those you saved but on all of us who witness your story today." The guard nodded slightly, acknowledging the words, yet he remained quiet. His humility was remarkable. He had lived a life of service without expectation of honor, yet the courtroom now recognized him fully. It was a powerful moment, a reminder that true heroism often goes unnoticed until it is brought to light by those who understand its value. Spectators continued to whisper among themselves, sharing their thoughts and admiration. Some were visibly moved, tears glistening in their eyes. Others were silent, reflecting on the lessons they had learned about courage, humility, and selflessness. The courtroom had become more than a place of rules. It had become a place of recognition, respect, and inspiration. The officer, seeing that the audience was deeply affected, concluded his account. "Let us remember," he said, "that bravery is not always loud or visible. It is often quiet, steady, and unassuming. The man before you embodies this truth. He has acted with courage when it mattered most, and he has done so without seeking personal gain. Today, we honor him not just for his actions, but for the example he sets for all of us." A moment of silence followed. Everyone in the courtroom seemed to take in the gravity of the words. The guard remained standing, a symbol of courage and humility, allowing the audience to reflect on the true meaning of bravery. His presence alone spoke volumes, and it was clear that the stories of his heroism had left a lasting impression on everyone present. The judge finally spoke again, his voice steady and respectful. "Let this day be remembered," he said, "as a day when courage was recognized, humility was honored, and the true meaning of heroism was made clear to all. Your actions, sir, will inspire generations to come, and your story will remind us all that bravery is measured not by medals alone, but by the lives we touch and the selflessness we show in the face of danger." The courtroom erupted into applause once more, this time longer and more heartfelt. It was a genuine display of admiration and respect, not for a medal, but for the courage, humility, and dedication of the man who had earned it. The guard allowed the applause to continue, accepting it with quiet dignity, never making it about himself, but letting the recognition belong to the lives his actions had protected. As the applause died down, the officer spoke one final time. "Let us leave here today with a renewed understanding of what it means to be courageous. Let us carry forward the lessons of humility, honor, and selflessness demonstrated by this remarkable man." And let us remember that true heroism is not about recognition, but about doing what is right, even when it is difficult, dangerous, and unseen by others. The courtroom slowly returned to its normal pace, but the impact of the moment lingered. Spectators and officers alike were deeply affected, having witnessed a living example of bravery and humility. The young clerk, who had been quietly observing, felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the memory of this day and the story of the Royal Guard would stay with her forever. The judge, now fully aware of the extraordinary life of the man before him, gave a final nod of respect. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "You have reminded us all of what it truly means to be brave." The guard inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the respect and recognition, but he remained composed as he always had. For him, the moment was not about praise or glory. It was about the lives he had protected, the principles he had lived by, and the example he could set for others. As the courtroom emptied, spectators and officers whispered to each other, sharing their thoughts and reflections. Everyone agreed that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a living example of courage, humility, and hope. The story of the guard and his Victoria Cross would be remembered not only for the medal itself, but for the life it represented and the lessons it taught. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm, golden light across the streets. People who had been in the courtroom carried with them a sense of inspiration and hope. They had seen bravery not as an abstract idea, but as a living reality, embodied in a man who had faced unimaginable dangers and returned with humility intact. The guard returned to his duties, continuing to serve with quiet dedication. Yet the impact of his story remained with everyone who had witnessed it. The courtroom, once a place of strict rules and protocol, had become a place of recognition, respect, and inspiration. And the message was clear. True courage, selflessness, and humility are values worth honoring, no matter the setting or circumstance. The courtroom had long since emptied, yet the echoes of the events that had just taken place lingered in the air. The story of the Royal Guard, who had stood silently with the Victoria Cross on his chest, had left an imprint on everyone who had witnessed it. Those present could not forget the quiet dignity, the humility, and the extraordinary courage that had been revealed that day. People walked out slowly, many still speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the sense of reverence that had settled over the room. Outside, the winter sunlight fell softly across the streets. People paused as they left the courthouse, thinking about what they had seen. Some clutched the stories they had heard close to their hearts, realizing that bravery was not something they had understood fully until now. It was more than physical courage. It was quiet, steady, selfless, and often invisible to those who had not witnessed it firsthand. The Royal Guard's presence and the medal he wore were now symbols not just of heroism, but of hope for everyone who had been in the courtroom. The guard himself returned to his post outside the courthouse, resuming his duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet inside him there was a quiet satisfaction. He had never sought recognition for his actions, and even now he did not need it. His purpose had always been to serve, to protect, and to act with courage when it was required. The acknowledgement from the judge, the officer, and the audience was meaningful, but it did not define him. His true honor lay in the lives he had saved, the people he had protected, and the integrity he had maintained throughout his life. People who had witnessed the events found themselves talking about them long after leaving the courthouse. Some shared the story with their friends and family, describing the quiet bravery of the man who had refused to remove his medal. They spoke of the humility with which he accepted recognition and the sense of hope that his story inspired. In offices, homes, and schools, people repeated the tale, and each time it carried a new sense of meaning. The Royal Guard had become a living reminder of what courage could truly look like. Even the judge, who had begun the day with strict adherence to rules and protocol, found his perspective changed forever. He reflected on how easy it was to judge a situation without understanding it fully, and how important it was to recognize true bravery when it appeared. The incident had taught him a lesson about humility, respect, and the value of looking beyond appearances. The courtroom had been transformed, not just by the presence of the Victoria Cross, but by the story and character of the man who had earned it. The older officer, who had first revealed the guard's history, remained proud of his decision to speak up. He knew that without his intervention, the audience and the judge might never have understood the depth of courage that stood silently before them. The officer smiled quietly as he watched the guard resume his duties, knowing that the recognition had been well earned, and that the story would continue to inspire others for years to come. People in the courtroom continued to reflect on the lessons of the day. They realized that bravery was not always about grand gestures or public recognition. True courage was often quiet, consistent, and selfless. It was about doing what was right even when no one was watching, and about standing firm in the face of fear, danger, or uncertainty. The Royal Guard embodied all of these qualities, and the story of his courage had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. In the days that followed, the story of the Royal Guard and his Victoria Cross spread beyond the walls of the courthouse. Newspapers and local news outlets reported on the incident, emphasizing the humility, bravery, and selflessness of the man who had stood silently before the judge. People across the city, and even the country, learned about the quiet hero who had risked his life for others, and the story inspired countless individuals to think about what courage and honor truly meant. Teachers began to use the story as an example in classrooms, encouraging students to reflect on the values of bravery, humility, and service to others. Parents shared the story with their children, explaining that true heroism was not about medals or fame, but about the actions one took to help others and protect those in need. The Royal Guard story became a symbol of hope and inspiration, reminding people that even ordinary individuals could perform extraordinary acts of courage. The Guard continued his duties as part of the Royal Guard, performing his responsibilities with the same dedication and humility he had always shown. Yet, even as he remained quiet and composed, he could sense the respect and admiration that had grown around him. People in the streets recognized him, nodding in acknowledgement, while others approached respectfully to express their gratitude. He received the recognition gracefully, always redirecting praise toward the values he held dear: courage, integrity, and service to others. For many of those who had been in the courtroom, the memory of that day became a source of motivation and reflection. They thought about the challenges in their own lives and wondered if they could act with the same courage and humility when faced with difficult situations. The Royal Guard's story reminded them that heroism could take many forms, and that every act of bravery, no matter how small, had the potential to inspire and change lives. The judge, reflecting on the experience, introduced a new approach in his courtroom. He encouraged understanding and respect for the experiences and histories of individuals before making judgments. He often recounted the story of the Royal Guard to his colleagues, emphasizing that true courage deserved recognition and respect, and that sometimes the quietest individuals carried the greatest strength. His perspective had been transformed, and the courtroom was now a place where dignity and honor were valued alongside rules and protocol. The officer who had spoken in the courtroom also found himself reflecting on the long-term impact of the incident. He realized that telling the guard's story had not only honored a brave man, but had also created a ripple effect that would touch many lives. By sharing the truth about the guard's courage, he had helped others see the value of humility, service, and selflessness. The story had become a lesson, a reminder, and an inspiration that could be shared across generations. Communities began to recognize the importance of acknowledging quiet acts of bravery. Organizations and schools started programs to highlight individuals who demonstrated courage, integrity, and service in their daily lives. The Royal Guard story became a benchmark for these initiatives, a living example of how true heroism could inspire hope, respect, and admiration without seeking attention or reward. Even in simple interactions, the impact of the Guard's story was felt. People who faced fear, challenges, or uncertainty thought of the quiet courage displayed in the courtroom and found the strength to persevere. The lessons of humility, honor, and selflessness resonated deeply, providing a sense of hope that courage could be found in everyday life, and that every person had the potential to make a meaningful difference. As the years passed, the memory of the day remained vivid in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Stories were retold, lessons were shared, and the Royal Guard continued to be a symbol of hope and inspiration. His actions, once quiet and largely unknown, became part of the collective consciousness, reminding people everywhere that courage and humility were timeless virtues. The Guard himself never sought fame or recognition, but he understood the impact of his story. He continued to serve faithfully, performing his duties with the same dedication, discipline, and humility that had always guided him. Yet he carried quietly in his heart the knowledge that his experiences had inspired others, had taught lessons about bravery, and had reminded people of the value of courage in its purest form. The story of the Royal Guard and his Victoria Cross became a symbol for many, illustrating that heroism is not about medals, applause, or recognition. It is about standing firm in the face of danger, acting selflessly for the good of others, and carrying oneself with integrity and humility. The lessons of that day were carried forward by the people who witnessed them, spreading hope and inspiration far beyond the walls of the courthouse. And so the Royal Guard remained, not just a protector of physical spaces, but a guardian of ideals, courage, honor, humility, and hope. His quiet presence, the gleam of his Victoria Cross, and the story of his bravery became a reminder to all who heard it that true heroism often stands silently among us, guiding, inspiring, and reminding us of the best that humanity can offer. Even as ordinary days passed, the memory of that moment in the courtroom continued to shine brightly. People reflected on the lessons learned and carried them into their own lives, striving to be courageous, humble, and selfless in their own ways. The Royal Guard's story had become more than a tale of one man's bravery. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of quiet courage, and a reminder that every act of bravery, no matter how unseen, has the potential to touch countless lives. And in this way, the story lived on, not just in memory, but in action. Every person who heard it carried a piece of that courage forward, inspired to act with integrity, humility, and selflessness in the face of challenges. The Royal Guard's life and the medal he bore were not just symbols. They were reminders that hope, bravery, and honor could always shine, even in the quietest corners of the world.